We have a major Jets trade update as Elliotte Friedman on 32 Thoughts said the Jets are looking to make a big swing with all signs pointing to landing a top caliber forward like a Brock Nelson. We have to dive into exactly what Elliotte Friedman said, the likelihood of landing Brock Nelson, or other moves the Jets could or could not make. There is a lot to break down today after this episode of 32 Thoughts, all coming up on this episode of Hat Trick HQ, and we're going to dive straight into it, Darius. We're not going to beat around the bush. First off, Elliotte Friedman on 32 Thoughts this morning. He said he thinks the Jets are really looking around for a big swing, more explicitly at forward, less so on defense. Hey, if they don't land a big fish and instead plug holes, it's not for lack of trying to. And he reiterates no trade clause issues. And look, Brock Nelson is one name that has been thrown around a lot, and he kind of falls in between this, if you know what I mean, right? He is a big swing. He is a fantastic player, but he is also sort of plugging a hole. But I want to dive into him because he's been someone that has been mentioned across the board from Islanders fans. 3 scenarios. They could trade him for a first pick, a young player, and an asset. We even have Murat Atis saying like, hey, he's talking about Nelson being a target for the Jets. When you look at the Jets this trade deadline, yes, maybe there could be a big swing coming, but a guy like Brock Nelson, to me, fits the lineup very well, though there are definitely some drawbacks to that. What do you think?
I think that he is like if they're going to acquire a player, a center at this year's trade deadline, he's probably the player for this team, right? When you look at everything he's done this season, like the points that he's put up so far this season with the Islanders, he's doing it with the Islanders. Keep that in mind, right? So if you were to add him to a team like the Jets that have a like a potent offense, right? And highly skilled offensive players, and they're one of the best teams in terms of offense from the back end as well. Like I think he can like definitely complement this team. So I think if they're looking at a big swing, and that's the verbiage we're using now at this point from Elliotte Friedman, this could be the guy that they're talking about, right? Although on the other side of things, like you mentioned from Murat, he has a 16-team no trade list. Usually on those lists are all the Canadian teams, right? And Winnipeg, right? So that is something to keep in mind as well. On the other side of things too, in terms of what goes back the other way, we made a video last week about how it could be Colby Barlow, who's a really, highly sought after prospect from the Winnipeg Jets. So that's an option too. They're going to want a lot back. They're going to want a sweetener. They're going to have to retain salary, right? He kind of fits the description here. I know Jets fans don't really want a rental or anyone at all, and we'll get to that later in the video too, but I feel like he does definitely fit the description. By all accounts, on the Islanders side of things, he could be making his way out of town this week.
Yeah, like, look, when Friedman is talking about, if they just plug holes, it's not for lack of trying. But to me, like, Nelson is more than just plugging a hole. Like, this is a guy that he's able to be traded for by a lot of contending teams, and he has the stats to back it up. Like, there's 41 points in 59 games. Again, he is expiring, though. So let me just take this from a Jets perspective, though. Look, there's been a lot of trades. I know Jets fans are frustrated with the amount of, hole plugging in this sense. We were talking guys like Monahan, we're talking guys like Toffoli, and now we're talking guys like Brock Nelson. And when you look at the way this lineup is constructed, there is no doubt there's a need for some center depth and even other holes in the roster. Like even see Murat mentioning in his article, someone like maybe a Yoel Armia coming back to Winnipeg to play the wing. There are some other things out there. But to me, there is a glaring hole here. Yeah, Nemestikov is fine, but down the middle, even like if it's plugging a hole, I think Nelson could make sense as much as Jets fans don't want it. But Darius, when you're looking at this team as a whole, they have cap space. They have $12 million in deadline cap space. Brock Nelson's cap is a $6 million cap hit. They can make things work financially. Again, they'd have to pay a decent price to give him up. But at the end of the day, when you look at the landscape of the NHL playoff picture right now, do you even think they make a move? Like, I think Kevin Cheveldayoff likes to be a little bit sneaky, surprising with things, kind of come out of nowhere. But at the end of the day, like, it honestly wouldn't shock me if the Jets decide this is just the lineup for them. Though I'm not as sold as some other people that this lineup couldn't use a tune-up or two.
Well, we see you guys in the comments and we see it online. A lot of people believe, and when I say people, I mean Jets fans believe that this team is good enough and they can get it done and they're playing really well this season. And they might be right. They could be right. But when, like you said, when I look at this lineup, Nemestikov has been great, right? And in his role, he's been fantastic so far this season, and he just earned himself a new contract, and that's all great. But there is a bit of a glaring hole there at second line center. Like, I think you can upgrade if you want to make a real run at the Stanley Cup, and Brock Nelson would certainly be that. So that's something to think about, right? And you would lengthen your lineup a lot in that way, especially if injuries happen and all that. There's a lot to consider here too, like with Brock Nelson and how much cap space the Jets have. This season, they wouldn't even have to retain the Islanders. This is a lot of the salary, right? Like you can make it work if you're the Jets, and you can go out and make another move, which is something that I think is attractive for the Jets because they wouldn't have to give up as much in a sweetener, right? So that is something to consider. But the other thing to consider is he's a rental, right? Like, are you going to re-sign him next year? Sandberg needs a new contract. Right? So many guys need new contracts. You just got Nemestikov gone. What's going to happen with Nikolai Ehlers? Like, we don't know what's happening there either, right? It doesn't look like they're going to trade him. Obviously, if things went south this season, that could be a different story. But they're making a run at it. So a lot of guys on this team need new contracts. Velarde as well, and he's having a career year as too, right? So you have to think about those things. Could you re-sign him? It's possible, right? But how much money is going out the door this summer? We don't know the exact numbers, but they're getting significant raises, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big things here because like Nelson doesn't have to be a rental. That's kind of like, well, a lot of these guys don't have to be rentals. A lot of these guys around the league, look, if they find a place where they're comfortable staying long term, they could just sign another contract. Now, again, whether or not the 16-team no trade clause includes the Jets or whether he'd be willing to waive it to move to the Jets, that's a separate question. But like, look, at the end of the day, you can find a player that'll stick around. Like if the Jets make a trade like this, whether it's for Nelson or whether it's for someone else, I think we're really talking at the end of the day about like, if it's an expiring player, could they sign them long term? Because yes, trading for guys with term is something that happens at the deadline, but I think we all know it's harder to get to get a guy like that at the deadline without overpaying too much. That's something you do more often in the offseason. But when you're trading for a UFA, if they seem like they find a new home, why not extend them long term? So that kind of leads me to maybe my final question in the video here. If Nelson's available, or maybe someone else, like again, like I know Marat mentioned Yoel Armia, he mentioned a couple other people. He said maybe even you just keep Appleton around, and that's fine. You don't push for too many other guys. But if the right fit falls in their lap, I don't see why the Jets, barring like again, their contract situation gets a lot more complex next year with the amount of people they have to re-sign, like you said. But again, if you can get a good player who is willing to stay long term and you can talk to them about that, talk to the GM and the other team, say, look, is this possible to have an extension sort of in place in a kind of trade like this? I feel like that option is not out the window either.
No, I think that they should probably execute on that if they can. Like if they have a Brock Nelson or somebody else similar to that they can upgrade at the 2C spot or at center in general, go out and do that. I think the only thing that, Kevin Cheveldayoff would pull out of is a bidding war, which I can also see happening with Brock Nelson and really every player at this point. We've heard some crazy things about Scott Laughton, who's also been linked to the Jets as well. So that's, there's a high asking price this year. One thing that I thought from the initial report was very interesting as well is they've almost pivoted their entire focus to the center position and not on defense. And I personally believe, watching the Jets this season and, discussing the Jets, they probably need, I'm not saying like a top pairing guy, but they probably need another defenseman. And this is telling me that they have faith in Logan Stanley and fans do not. So it's very interesting in that way. We'll see what happens there. They also have a couple guys waiting just in case there is. And they don't have to dip into the farm right away if there are injuries in the playoffs, which is a good thing I think for the organization and the team. But I do think that they could probably use another guy that has experience and is a depth defenseman. So the fact that they're kind of getting away from that, I thought was interesting as well.
Yeah, I mean, like to me, as a fan looking at this team, it's like top 4 D-man just seems to be to me the priority. Like again, center depth, forward depth is important, but look, this team has been playing incredibly well. I still think there are some needs, and yeah, some extra scoring, whether down the middle or on the wing, or maybe some extra defense along the wing, whatever it may be. Yeah, that could be very good for the Jets. But adding a top 4 defenseman, I think in a playoff scenario probably makes more of a difference. But hey, it is interesting. And you never know. Moves can come out of nowhere, especially this close to the trade deadline. So we'd love to hear from you guys. Let us know down below. Is Brock Nelson a realistic target? And if not, let us know who you would go target, if anyone at all, because it's going to get really intense in the coming days. But that'll do it for this episode of Hat Trick HQ. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm Josh Gosse, my co-host, Darius Domingues. We'll catch you in the next one.